Hello, I'm Pastor Chuck Seielstad, Senior Pastor of Center Points Christian Fellowship. I'm continuing with a series of teaching on the 1,000-year millennial period called the Millennium Studies. Today's teaching is Lesson 28, and it's called The Land of Israel, Part 9, the Millennial Temple, Part 4. Now, today, as I continue with this teaching, I'm going to show some illustrations that I wanted to show in my previous lesson. Then throughout the rest of the lesson today, I'll show some more illustrations to help understand and visualize the areas that I'm talking about with the temple. We'll be discussing the inner court of the temple itself, its buildings, altar, kitchens, and the surrounding area. Now, so first, let's begin with a visualization illustration from the previous lesson. I'll place some slides on the screen as I'm explaining the different points of the teaching. Because first of all, we talked about the line of flax and the measuring rod. The line of flax is a measuring instrument that functions like a tape measure. It's a long rope with knots tied every cubit or so, so that way you know the distance from one point to the next. Now remember, I've taught a lot more about this in the previous lesson, but I did want to mention that, and I'll show an illustration. As I've mentioned before, most scholars believe Ezekiel is using 21 inches long as a cubit, which was also called the Babylonian cubit, because that's where Ezekiel was when he had the vision. The second instrument is a measuring rod functioning like a long yardstick. It was 6 cubits long, which is about 10.5 feet. And the temple complex then will be the next thing that we're going to look at. The Millennial Temple will be many times larger than the previous two temples. The temple complex will be 3,000 by 3,000 cubits, and it'll be like 36 times larger, or 9 million square cubits, approximately 22,325,625 square feet, or about 512.5 acres. The next thing, the wall. The wall encloses the entire temple complex area itself. Remember, the rod is using 6 cubits, or 10.5 feet. And the wall will be 10.5 feet high and 10.5 feet thick. That's a big wall. Now, Ezekiel's complicated gate structures. And this is one that I really want you to think about. As I've mentioned before, Ezekiel's 6 gatehouses pose a challenge to anyone trying to picture them from just the written text alone. The towers that are above them is believed to be over 100 feet high above the temple's 6 gatehouses. The plan for each gatehouse resembles certain defensive gates built in Solomon's era, and you can find some of that in ruins that show these types of gates. But these are gates with 6 rooms and vestibules, which are not for defense, but for enforcing, most likely, ritual sanctity. Now, the eastern gate, Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 6 through 16, it talks about the eastern gates. And it's really, think about this. The eastern gate is the most significant gate in the temple, since it serves as the basis for describing all the other gates. The thickness of the outer wall of this gate is the same thickness of the wall that surrounds the temple, which is 1 rod, or 10.5 feet. Now, after passing through the gate, Ezekiel comes to a small room 10.5 feet square. And there are 6 such small rooms, all identical, 3 on either side of the passageway as you go through this gate. The 6 rooms are divided by a wall. And before stepping out of the gate building and into the outer court, there is a porch or vestibule, which each area measures 8 cubits by 14 feet long. Think about that. 8 cubits, so it's about 14 feet long. The entire gate building is nearly 44 feet wide and about 87.5 feet in length. Now, if you look at the picture, you'll get an idea of what that looks like. Now, the outer court. Leaving the east gate, Ezekiel begins a walk with the angel around the outer court. The outer court surrounds the temple on 3 sides, and all the court areas are the same size. They measure about 175 feet from the edge of the lower pavement to the beginning of the inner court. And here Ezekiel observes a lower pavement area of the north, south, and east sides of the temple. It's lower than the rest of the pavement, and that makes up the outer court and is referred to as the lower pavement, and it's covered with mosaic tiles. Now, within the court, Ezekiel observes a number of open chambers that are located along the north, south, and east walls. There are 10 chambers along each wall, most likely 5 chambers on each side of the outer gates. making up 30 chambers in all. And each chamber measures about 34 feet by 34 feet and will seat a group of 30 to 40 people. And to prepare the meals for the people partaking of the sacrifices offered, there'll be a kitchen in each of the four corners of the temple complex. And with the meals prepared, the people will most likely eat the food in one of the 30 rooms attached to the lower pavement. Now, let's move on to today's lesson. I wanted to talk about last week's because I wanted to show you these examples. Now we'll look at examining the inner court of the temple itself. Now, as Ezekiel concludes his walk through the outer court, he finds himself by the north gate leading to the inner court of the Messiah's temple. If you were standing on the Mount of Olives and you were looking at the temple, you would be looking through the east gate. So to your right, going north, would be the north gate. So the inner court gates, if you look at Ezekiel chapter 40, verses 28 through 43, we'll see that it approaches the north gate. As he does that, he discovers that in it, that the gate giving access to the inner court is made precisely like the eastern gate of the outer court. The only difference is that the gate faces the opposite direction. As the one faces going towards the temple, the other one is going side to side because you're entering into the court. In other words, the inside of the outer court gate is the outside of the inner court gate. So this way of building the gates enhances the symmetry and the beauty of the temple, since all the inner court gates follow this reverse pattern. The entrance to the northern gate to the inner court receives some special treatment by Ezekiel because it contains some items that the other gates do not appear to have. On the porch at the north gate, Ezekiel observes 4 small tables on each side of the passageway. You see that in Ezekiel chapter 40, verses 38 through 41. In other words, that means there's 8 tables, 4 on either side. And he notices that there are rings along the sides of the tables. Ezekiel is told by the angel that these tables are for the preparation of the sacrifice. We see that in Ezekiel 40, verse 42. Now, something I want you to understand about this. Remember, Ezekiel is giving such detail about the temple that we know that this is a literal physical temple. It's not something it's spiritual or some kind of made-up allegorical idea to talk about some truth in the Bible. It's a literal temple. And I want to impress that because people try to do that sometimes when they don't understand what it's talking about, especially when it talks about the temple being in the country of Israel with all the different tribes of Israel, with Jesus Christ himself inhabiting the temple. So I will tell you, when you look and you understand and read about Ezekiel's vision and about the temple, it's easy to be impressed with the amount of detail that Ezekiel gives on the various parts of this temple, even down to the hooks and the rings on these tables. Now, it's obvious that Ezekiel considers such details vitally important and wanted to leave nothing out. But this also verifies the fact, as I said, that this describes a literal and physical temple, not some allegorical explanation or some spiritual idea as some people teach. I just want to say that again. I want to have you understand that this is a real place. Now, we would conclude, since the tables are for sacrifices and that these hook rings are to places to tie animals while waiting their sacrifice, that it's going to be real sacrifices in the temple, which we're going to talk about here in the next week or two. Now, we'll learn from this text that the flow of the people through the temple will be in a north-south configuration. Worshippers who enter the north gate will proceed to exit at the south gate. Those who enter the south gate will exit through the north gate. And the eastern gate will be left for use by the prince, and we know who the prince is, which is King David, and will be open only on holidays for the general public. Now, let's look at the inner court. That's Ezekiel chapter 40, verses 44 through 47. And the inner court is an area of 100 cubits square, or 170 feet by 175 feet by 175 feet, 100 cubits square. Upon entering the inner court, Ezekiel's attention is directed to a small chamber by the north gate, and another small chamber by the eastern gate. The exact size of these chambers is not given, but we're told that the purpose for which these chambers exist. See, the inner court by the east gate, it shows that the small chambers in the inner court by the eastern gate are for the keepers of the altar and the personal ministers for the prince, the ones that are helping King David, who, as I said, the Bible reveals is King David. Those keepers of the altar and the personal ministers of the prince, they will be on the one that's near the east gate. Now, for the keepers of the altar, and they're going to be the sons of Zadok. We find out the sons of Zadok were special priests because they were always faithful. Now, if you look at the interior court by the north gate, in the inner court by the north gate is a small building called the Chamber of the Singers. And Ezekiel 40, verse 44 indicates that these are for the singers in the inner court. The one by the north gate is also for those who keep charge of the temple, and the one in the east gate, as I said, is for the one that keeps charge of the altar. So it's interesting to note that this is the only place where the symmetry of the temple complex is not carried through. In other words, it's not a duplicate on one side or another. These are special rooms. Now, to maintain symmetry, one would expect the chambers to be on the north and the south gates. And if you were to take the temple complex and cut it in half and put the north over the south half, we can see that the two halves match perfectly except for the one small detail, and that's those small chambers by the east gate. Ezekiel states that the chamber of the east gate is for the priests who keep the altar. Ezekiel 40, verse 46. As I said, they are identified as the sons of Zadok. Remember I said they were special priests. Well, here's the thing. The name Zadok appears quite often in the stories of David because Zadok was the only priest to maintain faithfulness to David his entire life. The sons of Zadok are privileged to come near to the Lord to minister to him. So in the kingdom age, the descendants of Zadok become the personal ministers also to Jesus Christ, the Messiah, and his prince, the ruler of Israel, whom many believe, as I said, the Bible shows that it is King David. Now, a significant application may be made from this. As a reward for the faithfulness that Zadok's descendants are granted the privilege of being ministers to the Messiah because of their faithfulness. They didn't desert David or do any deception during his lifetime. So Zadok's faithfulness is rewarded through his descendants. Now, the Bible also talks about the temple building. In Ezekiel chapter 40, verses 48 through chapter 41, verse 26. Ezekiel 40, verse 48 through 41, verse 26. On the west side of the inner temple stands the temple building. This is the central structure for which the entire complex exists. It is the main focus. The temple building is similar to all the other temple buildings that Israel has had. It's set on a platform 10½ feet high. And as someone approaches the temple by going up a flight of stairs to the top of this platform. And here one encounters two large bronze pillars. Both Solomon's temples and Herod's temple featured such bronze pillars at the entrance. So after passing the pillars, one enters a porch or vestibule area. It's an area that it's going to be open before going through the large, beautifully carved bifold doors. And like the Temple of Solomon, you see in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 4, the future temple has windows as seen in Ezekiel chapter 41, verse 16, and Ezekiel chapter 41, verse 26. So they'll have these windows. And these windows are in the porch area and are covered with wooden shutters of some kind of lattice work. Doesn't go into a lot of detail, but it does say it's covered by something like a lattice work. And the windows are probably for the purpose of providing light into the sanctuary. Now, the Messiah's temple does not have a menorah to provide light, as did the previous temples. See, there'll be at least one menorah or more in the third temple that happens prior to the tribulation period through the tribulation period. But in the Millennial Temple, there will no longer be a menorah in the temple. Now, I want to go back and explain something. In Israel right now is a menorah that has been made that will go in the future third temple that's going to be built sometime in the near future. But in the Millennial Temple, there will no longer be a menorah in the temple. And the most likely reason is because Jesus Christ, the Messiah, is the light of the world. So a menorah will no longer be needed. Now, as we move into Ezekiel's temple interior, we see the holy place. And the temple interior, as seen by Ezekiel, shows a tall wooden table, or kind of like an altar, before the door that goes into the Holy of Holies, which becomes Christ's throne room. Once inside the temple building, we find ourselves then into the holy place when you would walk in. And it is a room that's 70 feet long and 35 feet wide. And these walls are paneled with wood and ornamented with carvings in them. And the carvings alternate from cherubs to palm trees all around the room. Each cherub has two faces, a man's face and a young lion's face. You can see that in Ezekiel chapter 41, verses 18 through 19. Next is the Holy of Holies. Now, the Holy of Holies, as depicted by Ezekiel in chapter 43, verse 7, the first part of it, it says, "Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever." Okay, first of all, did you see what that says? Where I dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever. That means that Israel will be in the millennial kingdom. And as I bring those things up because it's contrary to what a lot of people, especially people that believe that the church has replaced Israel, they're wrong. Israel is still the chosen people of Israel. That's the Jews of the tribe of Judah, and it's all the other tribes as well. So understand that. I just want to make sure of that. Now also Jesus says, "This is the place where the soles of my feet will be, and that I will dwell in the midst of the people." So behind the holy place is the Holy of Holies. This room is entered through another door similar to the one entering into the holy place. Ezekiel does not enter the Holy of Holies, but his angel guide goes in and calls the measurements out to him. It's a room of 35 feet square, so 35 by 35 by 35 by 35. The temple will soon be built, but when it is built, think of this one, it'll have a veil that's dividing the holy place from the Holy of Holies, the third one that will be built. And inside the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant will be placed in the room as it did during the time of Solomon's reign. The Ark of the Covenant was not in the second temple. It was hidden away, and it was not there. And what dwelt what was in the between the cherubs on the mercy seat? The presence of God. And remember, it was seen by the prophet that it had left. It will come back in. The presence of God will come back in, especially during the millennial period. But the Ark of the Covenant will be in the Holy of Holies, and there'll be a veil dividing it during the time of the temple that will be built soon, the third temple that will also be used during part of the tribulation period. But during the millennial period, when comparing the Messianic temple after the Great Tribulation to the first and third temple, we cannot help but notice that two items are missing. There's no mention of a veil. Now, this does not necessarily mean that the veil was missing, but it's unlikely that Ezekiel would admit some reference to it if the veil was there. He would have said something about it. Second of all, there's no Ark of the Covenant. Why is that? Well, it's because scholars believe that these missing items are representations of the Messiah. In Romans 3:25, Hebrews 10:20, and 1 John 2:2. First of all, the Ark of the Covenant was not there during the second temple. And what happened to the veil in the second temple? When Christ died on the cross, what happened to it? It was rent in two from the top to the bottom, like tearing up a contract. And then the church was born. That did not replace the Jews as God's chosen people. I want to make sure that you understand that. But the church was born, and the church ends at the time of the rapture. Then it becomes the tribulation saints, and then all of a sudden after the tribulation, then you have all the things that I've talked about so far in the millennium. But we're a special entity set aside as the bride of Christ, whereas Israel is the bride of God the Father. I know it gets back into doctrine, it gets into the teachings that we've gone through, but I want to make sure you understand that these representations were of the Messiah. Now, when the Messiah is holding the presence of the Holy God in it. Because remember, the future temple will be blessed by the physical presence of Jesus Christ the Messiah. There will be no need for such physical representations of his person, such as the veil and the Ark of the Covenant. So you'll see that the Holy of Holies will be a place that Jesus dwells. Now, look at the temple building exterior, the building itself. The temple sides, they have chambers. And what we're going to find is that Ezekiel is taken to the area on the outside portion of the temple building itself, where he describes a number of side chambers located along the three exterior walls in Ezekiel chapter 41, verses 5 through 11. If you remember, there's three sides and there's the front where you enter. These chambers are found along the north, the south, and the west walls, but not along the east wall, since it serves as the entrance to the temple. So these chambers will start on the north side, go down, they'll go across the west side, then they'll come back up the south side. So these chambers are 3 stories high, and there are 30 chambers on each floor. In other words, there's going to be 90 chambers total. The chambers are entered through doors that are located halfway down the north and the south exterior walls of the temple building. Now, a study of the previous temples indicates that a stairway provides access to the 3 floors as seen in 1 Kings 6:8. So we'll know that it's most likely the same way that will happen on this temple. 1 Kings 6:8 says the entrance for the lowest story was on the south side of the house, and one went up the stairs to the middle story, and from the middle story to the third. Now, Ezekiel doesn't reveal the purpose of these side chambers, but they may be intended for storage, or they can be used, as many scholars believe, for the priest quarters for sleeping and for resting. Then you have the separate place. After that, when you're on the outside of the building, behind the temple, the separate place. And that's in Ezekiel chapter 41, verses 12 through 15. In the midst of his description of the temple, Ezekiel tells us of a building that is separated from the sanctuary and is located to the far west side of the temple area. This building measures 122.5 feet by 157.5 feet and has walls that are 5 feet thick. Now, the question is often asked, what is the reason for the separate place? Well, the answer is found in the meaning of the Hebrew word used to describe it. The Hebrew word here used is gizrah, and it's from the verb gazar, and that means to cut off or to separate from. Now, there are a couple of different views of what this building will be used for. One suggestion is that it will be a separate place that is used as a storage area for the things that have become somehow ritually unclean. And since they'll have become unholy, they must be separated from those things that are holy. Now, such items could later be cleansed or restored or discarded. Now, the second suggestion is that the building will be used for things that are necessary and not directly involved with worship. Things such as items used for maintenance and administration, thus appropriately giving it the name, the separate place. Next, we'll see that there are 2 buildings called the priest chambers. Ezekiel 42, verses 1 through 14. These are separate from the ones that we talk about on the building itself, because Ezekiel leads them out of the temple building to view these 2 buildings located to the north and the south of the temple and the building of separation. The dimensions of these buildings are identical. They're 175 feet long and 87.5 feet wide. Ezekiel 42:6 indicates that these priestly chambers have 3 stories. The description of the building is problematic because of some confusion over the meaning of the term gallery that is seen in Ezekiel chapter 42, verses 3 through 5. But this is the only place in the Bible where this Hebrew word appears. And what it means is it's an architectural term that refers to an offset ledge or terrace. The assumption is that the building must look very similar to a stair-step structure with skylights. The pillars support the open area around the skylights except for the third or the top floor, because the third floor is the narrowest floor and the span does not need supporting pillars. So the purpose of the priest chambers is revealed in Ezekiel chapter 42, verses 13 through 14. It says, "Then he said to me, The north chambers and the south chambers opposite the yards are the holy chambers, where the priests who approach the Lord shall eat the most holy offerings. There they shall put the most holy offerings, the grain offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, for the place is holy. When the priests enter the holy place, they shall not go out of it into the outer court without laying their garments in which they minister, for these are holy. They shall put on other garments before they go near to that which is for the people. So we can see that these buildings are intended as dining halls for the priests who offer sacrifices and who are required to eat certain portions of the offerings. This follows the pattern of the priest's ministry in the tabernacle found in Leviticus chapter 6, verses 14 through 16, Leviticus chapter 6, verses 25 through 26, and Leviticus chapter 7, verses 1 through 6. So these chambers are serving as places for the priests to store their holy garments. After ministering at the altar, they are required to change from their holy priestly garments before entering into the outer court where the people are, the regular people, the ones that aren't priests. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close at this point. But in our next few lessons, we'll finish looking at the temple. I've finished most of the things on this, but we're going to talk about the rest of the temple, begin to examine the sacrifices and the people's worship of God. And I want us to key in on that because I know that you're interested to find out what it says about the sacrifices. But I want to describe this, and hopefully the pictures that I'm showing with this lesson as I'm talking will help you to get an idea of what I'm speaking about. So for now, thank you for joining in with me today for this message. To find out more about Centerpoints Christian Fellowship, visit our website at www.centerpoints.org. On our website and in the narrative on YouTube and Facebook, you can find a link to our YouTube channel with all our video messages recorded so far, including this one. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter updates, my blog, and find out how to join our Wednesday night Bible study and Wednesday's Thursday morning Bible study by sending an email to me requesting it at info@centerpoints.org. And if you'd like more information about our upcoming trip to Israel that you could join in with us on, there is a link also in the narrative of YouTube and Facebook, or go to our YouTube or our website and you can find out more information. There's also the link there. You can go right to where you could register. And I will tell you, it will be a blessing to have a pilgrimage to Israel. Linda and I have led many of them, and I will tell you, it is a trip of a lifetime. So until I see you again, stay safe and may God bless you, and have a great day.